Hi knitters, today is the day when we are continuing the January headband. Last video we collected our materials, downloaded the pattern, and I gave you some direction and guidance as to what yarn to get. In this video though, we're going to start playing with your yarn and needles that I recommended and making a little tiny sample swatch. We're just going to get in there and do a couple of stitches really quickly. We're only casting on 15 stitches. We're only knitting about 15 rows. It's going to be a simple project today, but a really important project. Please don't skip this step. The reason we do this is primarily so that you know how big the stitches are that you're making in comparison with the stitches that the designer intended. If you make stitches really, really big and the designer was making really tiny little stitches, that is going to make a very big difference in the finished product. And so if the designer intended this to fit a particular sized form, but you made this, your product is going to be way bigger than this one. And so that would be disappointing after all that time and effort and material cost to not get something that you were hoping to have. So the gauge swatch is theoretically going to solve all those problems. You're going to be able to know what size you're making and gauge it to the size that the designer was working in. Ideally, you're simply going to copy that stitch size and get an identical product. So today, we're going to do the gauge swatch. We're going to get through it together and it's going to be okay. And that little bit of time is going to save you a lot of time and disappointment in the long run. We're also going to choose the size that you are going to knit today. I gave you 5 sizes in the pattern. I highly recommend you do the size 4, but we'll talk about that at the end, closer to the end of the video. Let's jump into the gauge swatch. So we have our materials collected. We have a starter set of needles, and let's start making a gauge swatch so we know if I can use these needles or if I need to go looking for a different size. Gauge is measured in usually 4-inch squares. And there are a number of stitches across the square and a number of rows up and down the square. We are going to actually just be doing a 2-inch square today. So though I gave you gauge in a standard format, we are only going to be working a half gauge today, and that makes it an extra quick process. Because this headband is so stretchy and so size forgiving, that is more than adequate for this project to do a little 2-inch sample swatch. So for this project, there are 26 stitches in the 4 inches. You don't need to worry about the rows for this particular project. And so for the half gauge swatch, we're going to do 13 stitches over 2 inches. I'm going to cast on 13 stitches, and then I'm going to add 2 more stitches, 1 on either side, to become my selvage stitches. Those selvage stitches are going to want to roll under and make it hard to measure. So that's why I add them on so that we can ignore them. So we're going to do a long tail cast on for a gauge swatch, and I am just going to cast on 15 stitches. So the gauge is in stockinette stitch. So I am going to knit the knits and purl the purls. Remember, the long tail cast on is row 1. So when I turn it over and I knit the first row back, it has to be a wrong side row. So in this case, I will purl back right away. I am going to work this for probably 10 rows. And the reason I say that is because some people do tend to put a long tail cast on way too tightly, and that is going to make this tighter than it should be. And it takes at least 4 rows for that to stop being impactful. So knit for 4 rows, and you're going to maybe see that your work is going to start growing out a little bit, and that's okay. That's where we want to measure it. And then you also want to take that as a little bit of a warning to maybe start doing a looser long tail cast on. That's telling you that you've been casting on a little too tightly if that's happening. This yarn is so soft and it's beautiful to work with. So far I'm really happy with my choice. Yay. If you're not happy with your choice when you do the swatch, it's not going to get any better when you do the project. So swatching is also a good opportunity just to do a test run with your yarn and make sure you like the color, the weight, the feel, the texture, the look, and that it's a joy to work with, because knitting is about the journey. This is going to be my last row, and when I get to the end of this, I'm going to turn it over and measure on the knit side and see if I'm at all close. So let me get my gauge measure. Okay, so right here, now I did put on 15, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. And those last two stitches on the selvage tend to want to roll under a little bit. And so that's why I always do 2 extra. So between here and here is what I want to be measuring for my 13 stitches. Should be hopefully 2 inches. But it looks like I only have 12.5. So you don't have 13 stitches to the inch. And so you're going to go ahead and you want to really do what the pattern says, which is get 13 stitches to the inch. But the question is, how do you solve that problem, right? So let's say your stitches are too big, which means you have too few stitches in here. What you need to do is size down on your needles because your stitches are too big. So get a smaller needle or knit a little tighter, depending on how off you are. So if your stitches are too small and you have more than 13 in the 2 inches, then you want to size up your needles and make your stitches a little bit bigger. I might have had 13.5 stitches in my 2 inches. I'm going to go up to a size 5, possibly a 6. You might even find yourself on a 7. If I have too few stitches in here, I maybe have only 12 stitches in my 2 inches. I'm going to want to go down needle sizes. So maybe to a 3, maybe try a size 3 needle, maybe go to a size 2 needle, and you might even find yourself on a size 1. Everybody knits differently. Different techniques of knitting are going to give you different gauges. Not to mention if you're under stress. So hopefully you are relaxed right now, and then you want to relax and kind of knit in that state if possible. So that's the story of the gauge swatch. Size up a needle if you have more stitches than 13, and size down a needle if you have fewer stitches than 13 in the 2-inch span that we're measuring. You may even have to go up 2 or 3 needle sizes or go down 2 or 3 needle sizes. Don't think that's off and too weird. Don't think you're doing something really wrong. Whatever it takes for you to get 13 stitches in a 2-inch space is what it takes for you. And that's okay. We support it. Working with size 3 needles now to see if I can get closer to the perfect 13 stitches in 2 inches. I had 12.5 stitches in my 2 inches before, and I just wanted to get it a little bit closer. Want to tweak that gauge to be as accurate as possible. So I just went down 1 needle size. I often find that going down 1 needle size will usually have an impact of about 1/4 of a stitch, but it is hard to say exactly. So just experiment until you get the right size. I'm going to do 2 more rows and then hope that I have enough done. All right, I worked down 1 needle size, tightened up quite a bit, and I think you can probably see the stitch difference. This is a little bit larger than this. So let's see now if we are at all closer. So I'm going to put this down on that one. Again, not including my selvage stitches, coming right across, and look at that. I like that a whole lot better. I feel like that is almost precisely 13 stitches in the 2 inches. So I am going to be working with this particular skein of yarn on size 3 needles. Again, when I did my sample, I was working on size 4 needles in order to get the same gauge. Really important to always find the needle size that is going to get you the consistent and expected final product. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off a little swatch and take the label and put that all together with my pattern and make a note on here that I needed to use a size 3 needle to get gauge with this particular yarn. So that'll be my note, and I'll keep all that together. If I didn't get gauge this time, I would just set another marker, pin another note that this was a size 3, and then go from there. I'll just keep trying something, a different size needle or tensioning it differently, and those things will give me a different gauge. Again, this is a forgiving project, so had I done it in the size 4 needles, it probably would have been fine. But you know how to get gauge, you know how to plan for that, and then you can just keep experimenting with different needles and tension until you find gauge. Then make a note. All right, knitters, I'm having a thought here. Once you find gauge, I think it would be really interesting if you could just take a quick minute to go into the comments and tell us exactly what type of yarn you're using, including the brand, the weight, the yardage, and tell us what size needle it took for you to get gauge with that yarn. I think that's going to be a really eye-opening survey. I think we're going to understand why it is so important to get gauge once we see the range of needle sizes that it takes for people to get gauge with DK weight yarn. I'm predicting, I could be totally wrong, you guys may be totally proving me wrong here, but I am predicting that we're going to have somebody probably finding gauge on a size 1 needle. I know that sounds crazy, but I think it's going to happen. And I also think we're going to have somebody that's going to find gauge on a size, I keep waffling between a 6 and an 8, but I have a feeling it's going to be a size 8. Some people knit really, really tightly, and they're going to need that big needle size in order to get that gauge. So anyway, I think it's going to be a fun survey. I appreciate you doing that. Let's jump back into sizes. I gave you 5 sizes to choose from. This particular fits a head size 16.5 inches in circumference, and it is considered a size 0 to 6 month. Then we have 6 to 18 months, 18 months to 4 years, 4 years to an adult small, and then a medium, large adult size. This is certainly just nominal. If this is the size head that you need to fit, then just pick the size. If you're not sure who you're going to make it for or what size specifically, I highly recommend the 4. The 4 started out at 17 inches in circumference and stretches out to a 24 inch. So it really encompasses almost the whole range. I suppose I could have just written it as a one size fits most pattern, and if you just want that, I would pick the size 4. As soon as you found your gauge, go get your needles that are 16-inch tip to tip circular knitting needles in the diameter that is for your gauge. So I'm going to have to go find a size 3 needle that is 16 inches in circumference or less. That will work. I know I have one, but right now it's on another project. So I'm going to have to see about that. But anyway, once you have your yarn pick and your needle pick and you have your materials collected, we are going to jump into the next video and actually cast on. I think I am going to bind off and keep my little swatch. I will put all this together and keep it with my pattern. I'm going to go look for my size 3 circular needles. So I have those. They have to be my short circulars. And then we're ready to start the next video. You did it. You made it through the gauge swatch video. I hope you found gauge, and I hope you're feeling confident that you are now ready to get an exact duplicate of the January headband. So once you have your needles that you're going to need, go ahead and jump into the next video where we're going to do a long tail cast on and do the rib pattern for the January headband. I'll see you there.